History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to this 552nd episode of the History Goes Bump podcast, Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going to a smaller town in South Carolina known as Abbeville. And actually, the end is supposed to be pronounced like it just has VL, so I think it's kind of like a Louisville kind of thing. So it's
Abbeville.
Like Abbeville.
Okay.
We're going to say it Abbeville, so just bear with us if you're actually from there. And if you're from there, did you know, even though this is a smaller town, it is thought to be one of the most haunted towns in South Carolina?
My guess is that's why we're covering it.
Yeah, you got it. And so we're going to have a lot of locations from there. Before we get into that, we want to welcome into the Spooktacular crew, Lucy, Kristen with a K and T-E-N at the end, Andre, Mia, Christy with a C-H and an I at the end, and JL.
Thank you so much for joining the Spooktacular crew.
And now, this moment in Oddity.
As children, many of us were told, don't swallow watermelon seeds or a watermelon plant will grow inside your tummy. Or how about this one? Don't swallow gum or it will ball up in your stomach and never be digested. Or at minimum, the gum will take 7 years to digest. Now, gum has several ingredients that are digested easily. There are sweeteners and other flavoring ingredients and softeners like vegetable oil added so that the piece of gum doesn't get rock hard after the first few minutes. However, there are some ingredients that are not digestible. At one time, the base of chewing gum was sourced from the sapodilla tree, which was not able to be digested by the human body. After World War II, the demand for gum increased to the point that the sapodilla tree's sustainability was unable to keep up with the production. The gum base evolution began with combining polymers that were both synthetic and natural. While it is still true that our bodies cannot break down the base of gum, our bodies are able to pass the undigestible portion, similar to how we pass corn kernels. And that fact reminds me of the game First Corn.
Oh yeah, we like to play that one.
If you know, you know. Our bodies are capable of amazing feats, but the thought of having a huge undigestible ball of gum stuck in our gut certainly is odd.
Turn out the lights. The party's just getting started.
And now this month in history.
In the month of August, on the 17th in 1786, Davy Crockett was born. Known by the nickname King of the Wild Frontier, Davy, or David as he preferred to be called, was born near Limestone, Tennessee. Growing up, he became known as a great hunter and storyteller, an American folk hero, frontiersman, soldier, and politician. After being elected to Congress in 1827, he came up against President Andrew Jackson, where he passionately opposed many of the president's policies, most notably the Indian Removal Act. This hostility towards Jackson's policies caused Crockett's defeat in the election of 1831. He was re-elected in 1833 and then lost again in 1835. This motivated his subsequent exit to the Mexican state of Tejas, later to become Texas. In January of 1836, Davy joined the Texas Revolution and died at the Battle of the Alamo in March of that year at the age of 49. To this day, it is yet undetermined whether Crockett died in battle or was executed after surrendering due to varying eyewitness accounts. Whichever is the case, he was a hero.
The town of Abbeville in South Carolina is near the Georgia state line and hosted the last war council for Jefferson Davis. The Confederacy died in this town. The tree-lined square hosts many historic buildings, and the town itself is filled with Victorian and Gothic-styled homes. This all makes Abbeville seem like a quiet little town. But underneath that southern charm are ghost stories. Many buildings here are said to be haunted. Join us for the history and hauntings of the town of Abbeville, South Carolina.
A group of French Huguenots settled Abbeville in 1758. The site was originally named John de la Howe for one of those Huguenots, but eventually John suggested the name Abbeville after his hometown in France. Revolutionary War hero General Andrew Pickens called Abbeville home, and he owned a lot of property here, including a freshwater spring known as the Big Spring. And even though it was a big spring, Kelly, it's no longer there. Pickens donated the spring to the people of Abbeville to use as their primary water source. The town was incorporated in 1840. This town would become the birthplace and deathbed of the Confederacy. The Confederacy is going to start and end in the same place. The place where it starts is called Secession Hill, and this was the gathering place for secessionists. They met there on November 22nd, 1860, to make their plan to leave the Union. A month later, South Carolina seceded. When the war ended, Confederate President Jefferson Davis stopped at his friend Armistead Burt's home in Abbeville for a night. This was May 2nd, 1865. And in the parlor of the Burt Stark Mansion, that's what it's called today, of course at the time it was just the Burt Mansion, he held his last official cabinet meeting and dissolved the Confederate government. The tallest building in South Carolina is here. This is the Prismian Copper Wire Tower. There are many historic buildings here, and a few of them are reputedly haunted. That's probably why they host a ghost tour in the town during October. Here are a few of those places. Kelly, let's start with the Abbeville Welcome Center.
The Abbeville Welcome Center is located at 100 Court Square. This building had housed the State of South Carolina Bank, and it's special because it is one of the few historic buildings to have survived fires that occurred in the 1870s. This is a starting point for the walking tours of the city and is also home for the Greater Abbeville Chamber of Commerce. The old bank building was built in 1865 and designed by S. Henry James. The lobby has a series of paintings done by artist Wilbur Kurtz in 1922. These paintings feature 100 years of Abbeville's history from General Andrew Pickens to Jefferson Davis's last War Council meeting. Nations Bank donated the building and paintings to the city in 1996. One ghost story connected to this building features the spirit of a young boy who likes to chase staff in the hallways, but he is usually seen as an apparition outside the building, staring down the street. A former volunteer at the Chamber of Commerce said of a ghost in the building, quote, "He's an older man and we can hear him whistling all the time. A medium visited us one day several years ago and described the man as an older white man around 60 or 70 years old. She said he was wearing blue jean overalls and a white short-sleeved t-shirt. Each time he was seen, he was apparently sweeping or mopping the floor of the bank, so we were okay with that."
And that quote comes from a book written by Marjorie Linnell, The Apparitions of Abbeville, The History and Mystery of the South Carolina Lakelands, and she also hosts the ghost tours that are there, or at least she did.
Nice.
I think she's still doing it. And we're going to feature several things that we've gotten from her book. Next, we have the Abbeville County Museum. This is one of our favorite kinds of places to investigate, Kelly. Why?
Because it's an old county jail.
Yes, we love those old county jails. Today, this is the Abbeville County Museum, and it's located at 215 Poplar Street. The building was constructed between 1830 and 1850. I don't know if it took them 20 years to build it or if this is just because they kept making additions to it, but it is the oldest building in town because of that initial start date. And it functioned as the jail until 1948.
Wow.
So for over 100 years.
Nice.
Rather than having half the jail house the criminals and the other half housing the warden and his family, this old jail kept prisoners on the second and third floors, and the ground floor was reserved for the warden and his family. I don't know if it's better to live underneath them or next to them. I wouldn't want to do either. The top floor usually had the worst offenders, and it's believed that hangings took place up there. And it really was the perfect place for them, as the roof is crossed by these thick wooden beams Kelly, you can just easily, throw the rope right over one of those, put it around their neck, and lynch them up there.
Great. How convenient.
After being the jail, it served as the county morgue for a while and then was the Abbeville American Legion and Dance Hall. That was mainly in the 1960s. The building became the Abbeville County Museum in 1976. Staff members have heard disembodied footsteps. Mary Baskin Hutchinson was an Abbeville historian, and she shared a story about a tour she gave to a medium. She took the medium up to the 3rd floor, and he separated from the group and went over to the corner and had what she described as a, quote, animated conversation with nothing. The medium returned to the group and he told Mary that there was a spirit here of a black man and that he wanted to talk to Mary because he was afraid they were trying to put him out. The spirit identified himself as Earl Miller, and he said he was 28 years old and that he'd been there at the jail since 1905. So Mary talked to him and told him that he was welcome to stay and help watch over the museum, but she requested that he stay up on the 3rd floor.
But why? He sounded like a nice guy.
Please don't mess with us.
Please don't put me out.
Next, we have the Burnet Brooks Inn.
Burnet Brooks Inn is located at 200 West Pinckney Street. This started off as the home of William Brooks, built for his daughter Maggie Whitfield Brooks in 1860. It was constructed in the colonial revival style and is a really large house, and this was because he hoped Maggie would have a large family.
Sneaky father there. I'm going to put a bunch of rooms in here. Please fill them.
Little manipulative. Maggie had different desires, and she never married or had children. She transformed the house into a boarding house for traveling railroad workers. Maggie lived in the house until her death at the age of 87. The house passed into other hands, and it was not maintained. An elderly couple named the Nichols were told they had to leave the house because it had become unlivable. A family named Parnell purchased the house and just left it in its sad state. The Burney family bought it in 1993, and they renovated the house. The renovations took a long time, so they didn't open the Burnet Brooks Inn until 2003. It seems that it closed in 2016, so you can't stay here any longer. The haunting experiences started happening when the Burns started renovating the house. It is believed that Maggie haunts her former home. The first thing that happened is that they found a penny at the top of the stairway. This isn't necessarily weird, but pennies started showing up everywhere. Some of the pennies were found outside, too.
Kelly, hearing stories about pennies or especially dimes being left around is definitely something that seems to be connected to the paranormal. Marjorie, who wrote the book that I mentioned earlier, has a whole chapter about why these pennies are significant showing up on this property. And I don't want this to come across wrong. So let me just say, the story that she tells is very elaborate. It's about this Confederate soldier who stayed at the boarding house. He was coming home from the war from Virginia. He had traveled through, he'd gone through North Carolina. He ends up in South Carolina. He goes up to this blacksmith. He goes up to him and asks, is there a place that I can get some rest, maybe get some food, get cleaned up? The blacksmith pointed him over towards Maggie's boarding house. So he gets there. Maggie is very sweet to him. She takes his money, which is worthless because it was Confederate money, and she nurses him back to health. The story kind of guides you into maybe they sort of kind of fell in love with each other, but he's got to go home and finally see his family. So he's getting ready to leave. He gives her a hug, and then this other guest comes in, sets his bags down, and Maggie says, oh, we just had a room open up. So then the soldier goes upstairs and gets his stuff out of the room. He's standing at the top of the stairs. He's shaking his pockets, which have a hole in them, and a penny falls out and lands at the top of the stairs. While he's been staying with Maggie, she would see him like looking out the window, and he's thinking about his family and the war and all this other stuff. And she would say to him, penny for your thoughts. And then he would respond, I don't like pennies because they have Lincoln on them. And so it became like this inside joke for them. So because this penny has come out of his pants and it's at the top of the stairs, he turns it over so that Lincoln's head is down so that she knows that this is a sign from him. So we're supposed to be led to believe that the reason why there was the penny at the top of the stairs is because it goes back to this Confederate soldier. Of course, I'm sure all the listeners are already there, but as I'm reading this,
yelling at their
I went,
phones and headphones.
Confederate soldier with a Lincoln penny? How is that even possible? Lincoln wouldn't have been on a penny yet. So I looked it up just to make sure, and it was 1909 that Lincoln was put on a penny. It's a great story, but unfortunately, there's no way it could be true. But we do know that pennies and dimes, coins, things like that do show up. So that's pretty cool that they were getting that kind of a thing going on at this location.
And next we have the John A. Harris House.
This is located at 200 South Main Street. This site was originally owned by former Governor Patrick Noble, who governed in the 1840s. He built his summer home here. That house was demolished, and John A. Harris built his home here in 1896, which was designed by Atlanta firm Bruce & Morgan. That firm had also designed Tillman Hall at Clemson University, so if anybody stayed there, same architects. John Harris was the former president of Abbeville Mills. These included the Abbeville Furniture Company manufacturing plant and the Abbeville Cotton Mill, which was the first mill in Abbeville. His home was built in the Victorian style with a wide wraparound veranda and portico supported by slender columns. The house stayed in the family for many years. John's grandson, Grant Harris, had a friend named Deborah come to visit him. When she entered the house, she told Grant she just had the weirdest sensation. When she was coming up the front steps, she felt a presence walk past her, and there was an icy chill to this feeling. Grant told her that it was probably his grandfather John, as this type of thing happened often. The house was put up for sale, and we're not sure who owns it now, but the pictures that I saw, Kelly, it needs a lot of love, so somebody needs to buy it and refurbish it. Next, we have the General's House.
The General's House is also known as the McGowan Barksdale Bundy House, and is located at 211 North Main Street. The nickname refers to two former owners who were generals, Confederate Brigadier General Samuel McGowan and World War II General William E. Barksdale. McGowan is the man who had the house built in 1888 over the foundation of his prior home that had burned down. He had moved to Abbeville in 1841 and purchased a Gothic revival home from a widow, which burned in 1887. Atlanta architect G. L. Norman designed the house in the Queen Anne Victorian style and features towers and turrets. A beautiful, unique feature in the interior of the house is a multicolored interior window with a cross over a landing on the stairwell, and the sun shines through it perfectly. There is a root cellar and a basement that has 8 rooms. The main floor has 4 rooms, a library, kitchen and dining room, large living hall, and a parlor. A grand staircase leads up to the second floor, which has a central hall and 4 bedrooms off the hall. The attic is on the 3rd floor. The last owner was J.D. Bundy, and he deeded the house to Abbeville County Historical Society in 1989. The house is today a museum focused on military history that has added 3 servant cabins to the property and a train caboose.
An anonymous journalist visited the house with a photographer friend, and they got a tour from an elderly caretaker. When they got up to the 2nd floor, the journalist heard an audible cough. The journalist mentioned to the caretaker who was taking them through the house that they probably shouldn't disturb the person on this floor. The caretaker asked the journalist what she was talking about because they were the only people in the house. Then she heard the coughing again. Marjorie Linnell writes in her book, The Apparitions of Abbeville, What Happened Next. "See," I said loudly and insistently, "there is somebody up here." I hurried to the front room where the door was open. "It's coming from in here." As I looked into the room, I saw the bed was neatly made and the room was tidy. It had a bed and a chest of drawers alongside a desk and chair. But there was no one in the room. At least, no one that the human eye could apparently see. "There's the room where William McGowan died," said George as he pointed to the room with his walking cane. "He was General McGowan's son," he added. "Died of pneumonia," said George. "He was only 39 years old." People claim to see the ghost of William McGowan looking out the upstairs round window, and the scent of cherry tobacco has been smelled. And that phantom cough has been heard by other people as well. And apparently it goes with the story, because if he died of pneumonia, he would have been coughing a lot. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. Next, we have the Trinity Episcopal Church.
This church is located at 200 Church Street. The church started in 1842 in a clapboard building. In 1858, it was decided that the congregation needed a fine building for their services, and they hired architect George E. Walker from Columbia to design the church. He found inspiration in the Gothic cathedrals in Europe, and it shows. This is a beautiful church with a tall front column with a soaring spire topped with a cross. The cornerstone was laid on June 27, 1859, and the church was built from handmade bricks. The interior features handmade woodwork. The really glorious part of this church, though, are the 19th century American stained glass windows. The father of stained glass painting in America, William Gibson, designed the chancel window that is entitled "Suffer the Little Children." Another window is from the 20th century and was crafted by J.R. Lamb Studios and depicts the Holy Family. There are interesting legends connected to the church. One legend claims that the chancel window was intended for a northern congregation, but couldn't get through a Union blockade of Charleston during the Civil War, and so the church adapted it to their church. There is nothing to support this, and is thought to have been specifically crafted for the church. Trinity has a bell that was gifted to the church by a member named J. Foster Marshall, who was a colonel that died in the Battle of Second Manassas. During the war, a Confederate officer saw the bell and thought it would be handy to melt it down and make a cannon. But thankfully, the bell wasn't made from the right kind of metal, so it was saved.
There was a woman visiting the town with her daughter, and they were walking down the street towards the Trinity Episcopal Church when all of a sudden the young girl broke away from her mother and ran towards the church, and then she went inside. Doesn't happen much, I think, with children. You just take off and go into a church. Her mother caught up to her and found her in the vestibule, talking to something the mother couldn't see. Her daughter came over to her very excited and proclaimed, "Mother, I want you to meet my new friend Elizabeth. She wants us to help her." The mother saw no one, so she ushered her daughter out of the church. But the daughter was set on helping Elizabeth, so the mother visited the church several times with her daughter over the next couple of weeks, and eventually she too could see Elizabeth. Elizabeth told the mother her problem, and there was an attempt to cross her over, but it didn't work because the spirit of Elizabeth is still seen and felt in the church. People see a woman sitting in the front pew wearing an old-fashioned dress. The sounds of disembodied weeping are heard as well. If the spirit is approached, it vanishes. The Elizabeth in this story is thought to be Elizabeth Marshall. Her husband, Drew, joined the Confederate Army during the Civil War, and Elizabeth would come to the church every day with the couple's son and sit in the front pew and pray for the safety of her husband. Unfortunately, Drew was killed at the Battle of Second Manassas in 1862. For some reason, Elizabeth was accused of being an informant, and so her son was killed in retaliation. She tried to attack the soldiers who did this, and it's thought she too was then murdered herself.
How terrible.
Yeah, I don't know how much of all of that is true, but that's kind of the background they have there. Next, we have the Belmont Inn.
This is a classic hotel featuring modern amenities and a restaurant and bar that was originally known as the Eureka Hotel, which was built in 1903 for $30,000. The first floor was open to salesmen selling their wares and served mostly people traveling on the railroad. Regular patrons were also vaudeville entertainers who would perform at the Abbeville Opera House. Fanny Brice became a regular. She was a comedian who created the Baby Snooks show, and the 1968 film Funny Girl is loosely based on her life story. Brice started in burlesque, joined the Ziegfeld Follies, performed multiple times on Broadway, and recorded several records for Victor and Columbia Records. The Eureka Hotel became the Belmont Inn in 1920 and ran as that until 1950, when the inn became a semi-residential home for the elderly. That lasted until the 1970s, and then it closed for several years. In 1984, it was restored and opened as a hotel with 25 rooms. It closed again for a while and passed through a few hands and is today owned by Jim Petty and his wife Susan Botts, and Susan is happy to tell people that her establishment is haunted. The claim is that this is the second most haunted hotel in South Carolina.
Which is saying a lot because there's a lot of haunted places in Charleston. So I'm like, second most
Indeed
haunted,
there
huh?
is.
The inn is said to be haunted by a former bellhop named Abraham, who worked with the original opening crew. He likes to walk up and down the hallways and jiggle the doorknobs. People have seen him still in his bellhop uniform, and a few guests have claimed that Abraham jumped into bed with them to snuggle.
Oh my.
Abraham.
You know what, though? If I'm having a hot flash and he's cold, feeling like a cold spirit, I might allow him to snuggle me a little bit.
Oh, Kelly. Do you think you could market that? I have the perfect cure for the hot flash.
Why not?
Find a ghost to snuggle.
Rent him out.
Let's put that on a shirt. The website Drugstore Divas, and let me just say, that is a fabulous name. I love it. Stayed at the inn and wrote, I was laying in bed in the Belmont Inn in Abbeville, South Carolina, and heard noise outside in the hallway. Instead of immediately thinking it was other guests, I thought it was Abraham, the bellhop, the dead bellhop, who haunts the hotel. So when I heard footsteps in the hallway, my first thought wasn't other guests walking back to the rooms after a night out on Court Square. My first thought was Abraham must be checking the doorknobs. There are other spirits here as well. One of these ghosts carries over from the opera house where she was performing, but she took ill and returned to the Belmont Inn where she was staying, and she died in her room. A woman in a black Victorian-era dress with a lace veil over her face and black gloves has been seen on several occasions near the registration desk. One person who saw her said that this spirit passed right by her and disappeared into the wall. and that this ghost appeared to be floating before that. The guest who saw her wasn't afraid, just surprised. She's thought to be completely residual. Rooms 5 and 12 are said to be the most active if you book this hotel, so ask for those.
Another spirit likes to hang out on the stairs. Marjorie shares this story in her book that she was told by a couple who stayed at the hotel. On a late evening in December, I attended a year-end awards ceremony for my place of employment that was held in the dining room on the second floor of the Belmont Inn. My husband and I entered the hotel through the side door on the basement level and took the elevator to the main floor. The bartender directed us to the elevator and stairs and said the choice was ours as to which one we would like to utilize. He then stated that there would be directional signs to point the way once we reached the second main floor. We chose to utilize the elevator. Once we reached the next level and stepped off of the elevator, I noticed a tall, well-dressed lady wearing a long baby blue Victorian dress. One could tell that it was tailor-made, as it fit her hourglass figure perfectly. She was also wearing a rather large, matching, wide-brimmed hat that tied around her chin. Lace gloves covered her hands, and she was holding a closed white parasol. She simply stood at the foot of the stairway as if looking frantically for something. As we passed by, she turned and seemed to look straight through my husband and me, as if we were not even there. The look on her face was that of panic and sadness. She then turned her head to the right, as if to look up toward the top of the grand staircase, one step at a time.
It was apparent that she had lost something very valuable. I uttered a friendly Southern, "Hey, how are ya?" and we continued walking toward our destination. My husband gave me the strangest look, and he asked me who I was talking to. "That reenactor at the stairs," I answered, and he gave me yet another strange look, but he didn't ask any more questions as we followed the directional signs and finally reached our destination. The incident puzzled me during our dinner engagement, and my husband insisted I was seeing things because he hadn't witnessed any such lady. I couldn't help but wonder if she ever found what she was looking for, but I hope she did. Over and over in my mind, I wondered about what I'd seen. I just summed it up as a reenactor or actress who was about to head to the neighboring opera house for her performance in a play. That must be what it was. I continued to try to convince myself. After dinner, I excused myself for a restroom break before we headed home. At that time, I met one of the concierges of the establishment. When I asked him about it, he explained to me that there is a ghost story in the hotel about a lady who lost her most valuable necklace and still, even in the afterlife, searches for it. She's been seen a lot. He giggled. I haven't seen her, but a lot of people say they have. She's usually right around the grand staircase. Now, this is just like when we did the interview with Aaron Egnatz, who saw those figures out on the battlefield at Gettysburg.
Right.
She and her mom see him, but the dad didn't see him.
Right.
That just blows my mind when one person sees the ghost, but another person doesn't see anything. Is it about, are we willing to see something? Our minds aren't blocking it? Or what? I mean, did they just decide, I'm just going to show up for that person? Although this sounds like it was residual, so it wasn't like something she was deciding to do with the spirit.
I don't know.
Finally, we have the Abbeville Opera House.
And since we already mentioned the Opera House, we should feature this location next. The theater is located at 100 Court Square, number 102. The Abbeville Opera House was designed by architect William Augustus Edwards and opened in 1904. This was part of a government complex that included a courthouse. The building is 3 stories and made from red brick, with brick sunburst around the keystones, and the parapet has raised central portion. The interior theater has 3 levels: orchestra section, balcony, and upper gallery. There are box seats on each corner, and large Corinthian columns flank the theater from orchestra floor to ceiling. The stage area is 7,500 square feet, and there are 12 dressing rooms. While updates have been made to the lighting, the old system is still here for historical interest. The first restoration of the theater came in 1968 and brought the seating up to 420. Everything was changed to red upholstery on seats, red carpeting, and red velvet curtains with gold trim.
The theater wasn't officially dedicated until 1908, but the first production took place in 1904, and this was The Klansman. I don't even want to know what that play is about. Other plays put on here included The Great Divide and Ben-Hur, with real horses in the production.
Oh my goodness.
Vaudeville was in its heyday, and Abbeville was a popular stop-off for traveling companies. Theater greats like Jimmy Durante and Fanny Brice played here, as did the Ziegfeld Follies. The place was so popular that the Southern Railroad ran special trains to accommodate the hundreds of people who came to Abbeville for the plays. Speeches were hosted here as well, with one of the most famous being by William Jennings Bryan. The theater eventually became the home of the Abbeville Community Theater. Today, the theater hosts plays and music concerts by tribute bands and other musical performances. David Eller was an Abbeville tour guide, and he shared about the ghosts at the Opera House. The first one to take up residence is believed to be a construction worker who died during the construction in 1904. He fell to his death from the top of the theater into the parking lot. He likes to bang pipes and hang out in the dressing rooms, and he's blamed for making props disappear. And what's really interesting about this wall that he fell from, I believe I heard it has no iron rebar in it. It is a freestanding brick wall.
Oh my.
Nature. So I'm like,
hope there's no earthquakes
standing
or anything.
Yeah.
Good grief.
The second is the young woman who had been staying at the Belmont Inn that we mentioned earlier. She was touring with a company from New York to Atlanta, and they had a stopover in Abbeville. This actress inhabits the house side of the theater, and she has a special seat in the third balcony. They leave a light on for her, which is more than likely the traditional ghost light of all theaters, Kelly, that we have heard about. And they leave her chair in its place and empty. If they move the chair, her spirit becomes quite angry and bad things happen during the production. People have claimed to see her apparition out of the corner of their eye. And that chair that they leave open is an original chair and the only one that has not been updated into the cushy, comfy seats that are now part of the seating arrangement. So nobody would really want to sit there anyway. But you look down the row and it's like all these plush red seats and then this wooden backed one.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's got to be a story there. Something is going on with that chair that they would leave it that way. Because why would you leave a chair like that?
Abbeville seems like it should be just a quaint little southern town full of charm and areas for peaceful ruminations. But clearly its reputation as one of the most haunted towns in South Carolina seems to have some support. Are these buildings in Abbeville haunted?
That is for you to decide. Well, a cute little town. We should hit that sometime when we're in South Carolina. We're usually over on the coast, and this is on the inner part, all the way on the other side, the most western part of South Carolina. But be cool to check it out someday.
Maybe on our way to the Smokies or something at some point.
We'd love to have you guys check out our website at historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com. Kelly, we had posted a paranormal conversation with Aaron Egnatz, and underneath it, our listener Cindy had said, I got so excited at the start of this episode, I hope I can make sense as I type this out. You mentioned taking photos underwater if you can see ghosts underwater. First of all, I nominate Josh Gates to do that investigation. Love his shows. I agree.
Definitely.
If anybody's going to find something under the water, it will be Josh. When I was a kid, we lived in Western Michigan. My mom loved going to cemeteries looking for ghost towns, out-of-the-way historical places. I think I was about 12, so the late 1980s. And Mom found out about a ghost town, Marlboro, Michigan. So one weekend we went out in search of it. I loved to take pictures when I was younger, and my brother had left a waterproof camera at home. So I had that and was taking some pictures around Marlboro. No haunting vibes, etc., just so very quiet but peaceful, not spooky. Before we were leaving, we were looking around in this little stream that was on the property and it wasn't very deep. So Mom suggested I try out the waterproof of the camera and snap a few pictures. I took 3 pictures from the middle of this stream, didn't see anything with my eyes, just stuck the camera underwater and snapped a few shots. Before we left to go home, I took the last few shots on the roll of film. When I got the roll developed, they all turned out pretty well. When I got to the underwater pictures, there was kind of a hazy mist in the center of one of the shots. In another, there was another hazy mist in a different spot, and the last one, no hazy mist. I showed them to my mom, and we tried to debunk what it was, but it was a mystery. My dad saw the photos and said, that looks like a leg and foot. Maybe someone was doing laundry. He showed them to my great aunt, who was a spiritualist, always saw things in photos, and she pointed out several figures in the town pictures and also said, this looks like legs and feet, and see the shirt? Someone was washing out a shirt. She also pointed out ghost fish, which I would have dismissed as light reflections, but when she pointed out the fins, I could kind of see the shapes. My dad was so superstitious, but I never heard him believe in ghosts, but he was the first one to point out the leg and foot, and he wasn't with us. No communication with my aunt before she saw the photos, so for both of them to pick those details out was interesting to me, especially the foot and them both thinking there was something being washed out in the stream, which clearly would have been done back in the day.
Definitely.
Sadly, I no longer have the photos or I'd share them with you. I've just moved too much to keep track of all the photos and negatives. As far as I know, Marlboro was never considered a haunted town, but maybe others know more about it. It was a long, long time ago. Was it an underwater ghost? That's for you to decide.
I love that.
Love that story. Thank you so much for sharing that, Cindy. I want to thank you guys for joining us on this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now. Bye-bye. This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Have a spooky experience that occurred at an historic location? Want to give us feedback or have a suggestion for the show? Share it with us at historygoesbump@gmail.com.
Test.
Test.
Kelly, this is a test. A test of the
Running a
emergency
test.
broadcast.
System.
Wop. Looks like our microphones are working.
Okay. One ghost story connected to this building features a spirit.
The spirit. It's a spirit. Look out for that spirit. Is it a ghostiot?
You're a brat.
Mary Baskin Hutchinson was an Abbeville historian. Historian.
Does she study hearse?
No, but they always
Hearses?
say his historian. We should get a little female gendering going in here
Oh,
sometimes
good
too. So it's
grief.
her historian. Yes.
Okay. She transformed the house into a boarding house for traveling railroad.
Railroad.
I cannot say
I know.
railroad.
That is like the worst word. It's like totally Elmer Fudd.
Railroad
Railroad.
and workers together.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Railroad workers.
You're terrible. He had moved to Abbeville in 1841 and purchased a Gothic revival home from a window.
He purchased a house from a window? It's a widow.
Large living hall and a
Parlor. It's a parlor. Are you from Boston?
maybe. And she was holding a closed white parasol. Gonna go parasailing.